So this week's Sunday message was about boasting. It was about the boasting that the Jews did in the time of Paul, that people have done pretty much since the dawn of time. And the problem with boasting is that most people, including you and I, will only boast about their good. Meaning, I don't go around sharing the things that I'm not good at. Of course, I do that sometimes. Jokingly, I talk about how poor I am with craftsmanship type things, and it's a joke within the church. But most of us don't go around boasting about the things that are not good about us. Now, some people will. Some people will actually go around and they will boast about how evil they might be or something like that. But, we call that maniacal behavior, and we do so for a reason. But if we only boast about our best, the problem is we're only telling a partial truth because we are not great at everything. And honestly, this is a part of the problem of social media because people post typically what the better moments in their life, and this leads to people seeing everyone's best self, which causes some to be depressed or downtrodden in some way, and even some other kinds of illnesses. But our less than best self is real. We are not always at our best. We can't always be at our best. We are absolutely average, meaning there are times in my life that I am below my average, and there are times in my life that I'm above my average. Math just says that I am living, from Andy Braams, an average life. And that less than best sometimes is just due to weariness or tiredness. There's nothing wrong. But sometimes, let's face it, it's sin. It's the sin in our lives. In our current culture, we see people seeking justice in all kinds of ways, but not calling it sin. But whatever people want to call it, the ultimate challenge, the ultimate problem with all of humanity is sin. The Bible makes that clear. But we must understand that sin is largely a Christian ideal. Even in the first century, the concept of sin was not considered overly serious, unless, of course, somebody committed sin directly against you. But most didn't consider the idea of sin something that needed to be overcome on a grand scale. You might sin against me, I might sin against you, but we're not going to think about sin on a more global scale. And that idea is truly pagan, but not in the worst sense of the word of pagan. It was simply a reality. It was the basic understanding in the first century until Christianity, until people started to follow Jesus and preach Jesus. That Christianity pointed to the sin of others is a part of why people may have been skeptical in that time. But unlike many Christians today who only point to the sin of others, those early Christians were also pointing to the solution of sin. And we see that in many early writings, most of which are in the Bible, but other Christian writings of the time showing that people were sharing the message of God, a better message. Showing that the message was not just about sin, but that God had provided a solution as well. And that solution, of course, is Jesus. Now, Paul has confronted the lack of faithfulness, in part directly confronting sin from the latter half of Romans 1 and through Romans 2, and now for Romans 3 as well. And he's not done yet, because when we get to Romans chapter 5 through 7, guess what? Paul's going to talk a lot more about the prevalence of sin in the lives of people. Paul also uses other forms of the word for sin more than any other writer. The Greek word for sin is hamartia, and that particular word is used 173 times in the New Testament. Paul uses that term 64 of those times, and get this, 48 of the times that Paul uses that word are in the letter to the Romans. So this is an aspect that he is desperately trying to address to this person. By comparison, the next closest number of uses of that term is 25 in the book of Hebrews. But again, Paul does not merely emphasize the nature and the effects of sin, he shares the solution as well. We saw this a couple of weeks ago, and in the daily videos over the last 3 weeks, you've gotten some further dive, a deeper look at those verses, Romans 3, verses 21 through 26. Those verses reveal that the gospel, which is the power of God unto salvation, as Paul wrote in 1:16, and allows us to live a life of faith, Romans 1:17, that he is now telling us our faith, that gospel, should be the focus for our salvation. That gospel, the message, the good news of Jesus Christ. And he continues this idea of having faith in Christ in chapter 4 before returning to sin in 5 through 7. But then he begins to tell the true hope of the believer, as we'll see finally in Romans 8, which I believe is the greatest chapter written in the Bible. And in that chapter we find out that indeed we can be free from sin. So sin is real. It creates a less than ideal reality for the world. It creates a less than ideal reality for our families. It creates a less than ideal reality for ourselves. We must recognize that that is true, but we also must recognize that God has provided the solution. And that solution, the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus, is a message that is truly worth sharing. In fact, that message is truly worth a boast. As Paul wrote to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 17, if anyone boasts, let him boast in the Lord. So let us not be guilty of just correcting people, and certainly let us not be guilty of condemning people. Rather, let us present the only real solution to the problem of sin, the biggest problem that mankind faces. Let us share the message of Jesus. The one who, as Paul also wrote in 2 Corinthians, is the one who made us sin in himself. He took our sin upon himself. That is the message that is worth boasting about.